Resuming debate, the member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members of this House, I rise today to talk about a very important bill, a bill that I invite all members of this House to support in order to restore a fair and balanced approach to labour relations in Canada. Before I begin, I do wish to acknowledge that both my parents were union members, and it is through the labour movement and through their fight for fair wages, fair benefits, safe working conditions that my family prospered and our family prospered in Canada, and we owed to a strong middle class. So I do wish to state that. If passed, Bill C-4 would repeal the legislative changes made by Bill C-377 and Bill C-525, both of which have undermined labour unions and labour relations in this country. Let me tell you how, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to start with Bill 377. Bill 377 amended the Income Tax Act to require all labour organizations and labour trusts across Canada to provide very detailed financial and other information to the Minister of National Revenue. This information would then be made available to the public on the Canada Revenue Agency's website, and if labour organizations do not comply with these rules, they would face hefty fines. At first glance, these new reporting requirements might seem like a good thing. Sharing financial information promotes transparency and accountability. And I am sure that members of this House would agree that is a worthy goal. I do. However, there is a big however I say to my opposition colleagues. If we examine this bill further, we find that in fact it discriminates against labour unions. First, Bill C-377 discriminates against unions because it places onerous, unfair public reporting obligations on them that do not apply to other organizations, such as professional associations, that benefit from similar treatment under the Income Tax Act. Mr. Speaker, why is this onerous task imposed on unions alone? Why tip the scales? Perhaps these financial reporting requirements would be justified if similar requirements didn't already exist elsewhere, but they do. Unions are already required to disclose financial information to their members under the Canada Labour Code and many provincial labour relations statutes. This includes British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and the beautiful province of Newfoundland and Labrador. Mr. Speaker, in addition to Bill C-377 discriminating against unions, it's also unnecessary. It creates an extra administrative burden, just another layer of red tape. The Liberal Party of Canada does not like red tape. There's another reason that this bill is inherently unfair to labour unions. Simply put, it creates an imbalance between unions and employers during the collective bargaining process. How exactly? By giving employers access to key union information without employers being required to share similar information. This makes for a very uneven playing field during the collective bargaining process. For example, employers would know how much money the union has in a strike fund for a possible work stoppage and how long they could stay out if it came to a strike. This clearly undermines the union's most important negotiating lever. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move on to Bill C-525, which C-4 would also repeal. Bill C-525 changed the way that unions are certified and decertified under the Canada Labour Code, the Parliamentary Employment and Staff Relations Act, and the Public Service Labour Relations Act. It replaced what was known and is known as a card check system with a mandatory vote system. For decades, and I emphasize decades, prior to Bill C-525 coming into force, if a union demonstrated that a majority of workers had signed union cards, the union could be certified as the bargaining agent for those workers. A vote was only required if less than a majority signed, but there was still enough to indicate a strong interest. Under the Canada Labour Code, it was 35% of workers. That number is 35%, Mr. Speaker. Bill C-525 changed that to require that unions show at least 40% membership support before holding a secret ballot vote, and to require a vote even where more than 50% of workers have signed a union membership card. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, Bill C-525 also makes it easier for unions to be decertified. It lowers the threshold to trigger a decertification vote from majority support to 40%. Overall, as stakeholders such as CUPE, Canadian Union of Public Employees, have pointed out, the card check model is faster, more efficient, and more likely to be free of employer interference than the new method. In short, Bill C-525 makes it harder for employees to unionize, makes it easier for a union to be decertified. It tips the scales in an unbalanced manner. Bill C-525 made significant changes to a system that worked. There was a democratic and fair system in place for employees for decades to express their support for a union. A card check system relies on majority support, a key democratic principle. The bottom line is that Bills C-377 and C-525 upset the delicate balance between the rights of employers and the rights of employees. Mr. Speaker, the bill put before this House today, Bill C-4, seeks to repeal the legislative changes made by these two bills. It seeks to restore the rights of labor organizations in this proud country. Unifor's national president, Jerry Diaz, welcomes Bill C-4. He said, "We have simply been given back rights that were taken from us." Why are these rights so important? Because the rights of labor unions and workers they represent are also the rights of Canadians. Who are those Canadians? They're carpenters, they're electricians, they're plumbers, they're cleaners. They're the people we encounter every day. They're Canadians, and they're working Canadians, and they're working hard to put money in their bank and save for their children's future. As elected officials, we have a responsibility to protect those rights. Labor unions advocate for decent wages and safe working environments. They play an essential role in maintaining positive labor relations between employers and employees. And sound labor relations protect the rights of Canadian workers and help the middle class grow and prosper. Let's not allow Bills 377 and C-525 to continue to diminish, and weaken Canada's labor movement. Mr. Speaker, I urge the members of this House to repeal Bills C-377 and Bill C-525 and lend their support for Bill C-4, which will restore a fair and balanced approach to labor relations in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Bravo.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Stormont, Westmount, Glengarry.
Recall that Bill C-377 was around for a long time. It was sponsored by one of our colleagues, Jeff Watson. And Jeff worked tirelessly to bring this into fruition and to make it into law. And I once asked Jeff, I said, why are you working so hard for this? Jeff used to be a union member, a very, very enthusiastic union member in the auto industry. And Jeff said, you know why I'm doing it, Guy? I'm doing it for my colleagues that are on the line. My fellow union members, I used to be in the union, I was in the PSAC union, Mr. Speaker. And I understand, guys on the line, people that are doing the actual work, they wanted 377. And you know, my own personal experience as a member of Parliament, 377, like I said, was around for a long while. And people would come and say, I had two people come to 377 to see me about 377, telling me we shouldn't endorse it. I had 33 people come to me and say, we need 377. We need for our organizers to teach. How come this member and this party can go against the rank and file of our great labor movement? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
I thank my honourable colleague for his comment and question. I find it a bit ironic in yesterday's opposition day that we had the Conservative parties speak to the strength of our middle class in Canada. And I actually think one of the strengths that underpins our middle class in Canada is our labour movement. So, are you against it? Not against it, sir. The labour movement here in Canada is very strong. We're supporting it. We want to bring balance back to the collective bargaining process.
I remind colleagues to address the chair at all times. Questions and comments? The honourable member for Essex.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to address something that was just brought forward and say that, first of all, there are not just guys that work on the line. These unionized workers across Canada are healthcare workers, public sector workers. They are men and women supporting their families with good-paying jobs. I'd also like to say that I come from a unionized workplace, and having been there for 20 years, I know the workplace that the previous member was speaking of, and you'd be hard-pressed to find one person in that workplace to stand up and say that they support this regressive piece of legislation. As a union member, Transparency is important to me, and it is available to me at all points in time. The way union members direct their funds in Canada is actually by the direction of the members. Although we contribute dues, we determine the direction of those dues at every level. So I'd like to ask my colleague, after his excellent speech, why does he feel that this is so important to the labour movement and to the rank and file, who are the working people of Canada?
Member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Thank you to my honourable colleague for her comment and question. We need a fair and balanced approach restored in the collective bargaining process in Canada. Workers' rights and views need to be represented at the bargaining table in a fair and balanced manner. That's what this bill aims to achieve. In a democracy, unions and formation of unions is a fundamental right, and of course we fully support that within this bill. Bill 377 was something that was punitive, Mr. Speaker, to unions. It ignored the employer bargaining units. It did not look at them at all. It poked unions. To be frank, it is something that we know is the right thing to do to repeal it, and that's what we will do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Right. We have time for one more short question. Questions and comments? Now, member for Prince George, Peace River, and Northern Rockies.
It's good. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, it's a long name. Yeah, I just wanted to thank the member for his speech, but I guess as a former union member that wasn't always given the stats of what our dues went to or the monies that were there that actually were collected from my paycheck. And as a government that claims to be wanting accountability, this to me, it fails me to see why we would want to remove an accountability bill. Please, for the House and for the rest of Canadians, why are you against accountability?
Now, member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
I thank my honourable member, for that comment and question. Union financial disclosure is already addressed in the Canadian Labour Code and in many provincial statutes. The bill that was introduced through Bill C-377, Mr. Speaker, was an onerous bill, provided extra red tape to unions, and did nothing to further employee and employer bargaining process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sure.